Thank you so much, Justin, for that, for chairing tonight and for that very kind introduction. I'd also like to thank Catherine Clark for the invitation to present my research to the People, Place, and Community Seminar, and for her always enthusiastic support for this project. My aim this afternoon is to illustrate how the Get to Know Medieval Londoners project has leveraged emergent technology to transform academic collaboration and create new opportunities for equitable, accessible, and engaging scholarship. Right. Does that look good for everybody? Everyone can hear me okay? All right, perfect. Since its launch in June of 2022, this project has invited a wide array of voices into the exploration of place-based history, successfully guiding nearly 2,000 volunteers through over 20,000 data entry sessions. The majority of these volunteers have never engaged in a historical project before, let alone had such direct exposure to the medieval world. At its core, the project relies on the Zooniverse digital infrastructure, part of which you can see here, which is a versatile crowdsourcing platform that offers an inclusive space for the public to participate in data collection. Get to Know Medieval Londoners highlights a remarkable resource in the Institute of Historical Research's collection: thousands of handwritten, modern English translations of property deeds from medieval London. These records are an invaluable source of information for hyperlocal histories of London's wards, parishes, streets, and even individual properties. The Zooniverse platform enables anyone with an internet connection and a proficiency in English to aid in digitizing and producing structured data from these underutilized records. All of the crowdsourced data from this project will then be added to the Medieval Londoners Database, or MLD, which is a multifaceted digital project led by Dr. Marianne Kowaleski of Fordham University. Get to Know Medieval Londoners and MLD are deeply connected projects, sharing a temporal scope and common data structuring standards. The result of this crowdsourcing process will be a massive repository of linked data that contributes to a prosopography of Londoners and can be used in many future research applications. Get to Know Medieval Londoners' approach to place-based history departs from the conventional research methodologies that rely solely on the expertise of a select few. Instead, the project embraces a collaborative model of production. The shift away from a hierarchical structure acknowledges the importance of varied perspectives in historical research. And the interactive nature of a crowdsourcing project adds a level of immersion that goes beyond the ways that the public normally interacts with medieval material, prompting deeper connections with the sources and the opportunity for independent engagement. So in essence, this project explores what can be gained by not only presenting, but actually conducting research in an open and accessible way. Delving into the collaborative possibilities that advanced technology offers, the seminar is going to showcase a unique partnership between historians and a group of volunteers who are unrestricted by geography or traditional academic structures. First, we'll take a closer look at the historical sources themselves and why they're well suited to a crowdsourcing project with Zooniverse. Then we'll kind of walk through the steps of designing an accessible crowdsourcing project for a diverse audience, as well as how the project actually collects data. Finally, we'll look at the Get to Know Medieval Londoners' unique model of co-production and how it balances accurate data collection with reciprocal relationships with the volunteers who are actually doing that work. Okay, so turning now to the source material. Get to Know Medieval Londoners relies on a collection of historical documents sourced from the Husting Court of medieval London. These records primarily focus on residential and commercial property transactions and are extracted from the deeds and wills rolls. You can see some of the originals here. Currently housed at the London Metropolitan Archives, the original documents take the form of court rolls, which are long sheets of parchment that are stitched together and rolled up. By providing highly detailed accounts of property transactions in particular parishes and on specific streets, these records provide a rare glimpse into the hyperlocal. Through these records, we can see, for example, the passage of a house through several generations of a family, how a widow might come to own property and what she might choose to do with it, or the changing names of a tavern or a shop over several decades. Although they generally skew towards the city's more well-off inhabitants, studies of London's property records can illustrate how familial connections and commercial networks have shaped the built environment over time as homes and businesses pass from one person, family, or organization to another. However, none of this comparative research is possible without first digitizing these records and extracting relevant data points. Researchers at the Center for Metropolitan History began this process in the 1980s by using index cards to painstakingly transcribe and partially translate several thousand husting deeds and wills related to 5 Cheapside area parishes. As many of you know, this work is part of a project called the Social and Economic Study of Medieval London. Derek Keane and Vanessa Harding, the lead researchers of that project, were responsible for the majority of the transcriptions, with assistance from Martha Carlin, John Stedman, David Crouch, and Joanna Mattingly. Although these scholars wrote extensively about the topography of London and property holding within the city over the next few decades, the deed cards themselves were never published and are currently in storage at the IHR in the Great Wall of Cheapside. And in realizing what a valuable resource this archive represented, I searched for a way to make the index cards more accessible. So in June 2022, I spent 3 weeks in London working with the IHR to produce the high-quality scans that you see here. The assistance of our very own Justin Coulson, Kate Wilcox, and Michael Townsend from the IHR, as well as Elizabeth Duchovny and Marianne Kowaleski from Fordham University, was absolutely invaluable while troubleshooting the scanning process. Producing these digital versions of the cards was an important step towards making them more widely accessible, but we soon realized that the scans on their own were not particularly useful due to the poor quality of the handwriting and the widespread use of abbreviations in Latin. Attempts to digitize the text with optical character recognition technology, or OCR, were unsuccessful. The only other traditional option would have been to process the text manually by typing up each card. This approach would have been incredibly labor-intensive for a team of scholars to complete, or let alone one person. Enter crowdsourcing. In recent years, as digital humanists continue to incorporate newer methodologies into their repertoires, crowdsourcing has emerged as a very elegant solution to address the labor challenges associated with large quantities of unruly data. Crowdsourcing is just one of many approaches that leverage emergent technology, but it stands out for its potential to engage public audiences while simultaneously collecting data. Academic crowdsourcing relies on the principle that, when guided appropriately, large groups of non-specialist volunteers can produce data of comparable quality to professional researchers. With this method, collective labor can be used to enrich scholarly understanding of a particular topic, complete repetitive tasks, or to add value to an existing collection of resources. Crowdsourcing projects often vary in the level of autonomy granted to participants, but each individual's contribution, no matter how small, then facilitates the creation of a comprehensive whole. And thus, a crowdsourcing project offers a very low-cost way for digital humanists to systematically study a large body of material while also meaningfully engaging with the public audience. The IHR's remarkable collection of deed transcriptions is ideal for a crowdsourcing initiative for several reasons. First, there are over 3,000 index cards in this particular collection, making manual data entry nearly impossible. Second, any public-facing project needs accessible sources, and the index cards address various readability challenges associated with medieval documents. The cards are written in modern handwriting and primarily in English, while the original documents are inscribed on parchment, in a cursive court hand, and in heavily abbreviated Latin that includes obscure legal terminology. So in contrast, the index cards are much more accessible to a general audience due to their modern handwriting, translations, and the relatively concise summaries compared to the verbose originals. The translations are also trustworthy since they were produced by the very experienced scholars at the Center for Metropolitan History. Finally, both the cards and the originals are physically inaccessible to anyone outside of London. So utilizing these cards in a crowdsourcing project not only enables a digitization initiative on a much larger scale than would have otherwise been possible, but also provides a much wider range of people with greater access to historical source material. So after conducting extensive research on digital crowdsourcing platforms that could facilitate a project of this complexity, Zooniverse quickly emerged as the most flexible, user-friendly, and cost-effective option. Zooniverse is a browser-based citizen science platform that champions accessible research and open access data. It emerged out of a massive citizen science initiative known as the Galaxy Zoo Project, which, in addition to giving the platform its name, launched back in 2007 and is still active. As the preeminent hub for crowdsourcing projects that employ a digital volunteer model, Zooniverse boasts a staggering 2 million volunteers who participate in dozens of active projects. The platform is primarily a collaboration between the Adler Planetarium, the University of Minnesota, and the University of Oxford, with support from numerous other organizations. So Zooniverse emerged as the best choice for this project for several reasons. What initially stands out is its cost effectiveness. The platform is completely free for both researchers and volunteers throughout the entire lifecycle of a project. 2, the platform uses a streamlined and user-friendly digital infrastructure that enables it to accommodate projects of varying sizes and scopes, and also allows for customized data collection tasks. Beyond its functionality, the platform is a collaborative space where a diverse community of researchers and volunteers can seamlessly interact in real time. The platform's staff members are also incredibly knowledgeable about crowdsourcing and are accessible during all phases of a project, from development to launch, all the way through data processing. Their goal is to help researchers produce accessible data and publications with their platform, and their dedication provides a safety net for project developers as they navigate building a project for the public. And finally, Zooniverse is already popular among many individuals with a wide range of backgrounds and interests, particularly those in STEM fields who may not typically engage with historical subject matter. This ready-made pool of volunteers offers a unique opportunity to reach a skilled and interested audience without a robust marketing campaign. So if most of the volunteers who will participate in a project are already registered with Zooniverse, who are they? It's almost impossible to create a profile of a typical Zooniverse volunteer, as they're very diverse. The platform serves as a true melting pot, welcoming individuals of any age, background, or interest. According to the last site-wide survey, which was conducted in 2015, most volunteers live in English-speaking countries and are either employed full-time or retired. While the statistics on participants' ages are the most diverse of all the demographics studied, over a third of volunteers are between the ages of 30 and 35, and another third are in their late 50s. Unfortunately, Zooniverse does not collect demographic information for volunteers on specific projects, and so any understanding of who the volunteers are for Get to Know Medieval Londoners specifically relies entirely on the information they provide voluntarily through the discussion boards. So these are all posts from our discussion boards of volunteers introducing themselves. Those pictured here, for example, include a former history student from Sao Paulo, Brazil, a retired stay-at-home mom with a microbiology degree, and an accountant who has experience with modern property records. And the majority of volunteers who have introduced themselves in this way do have some prior interest in history. They may have studied it formally in school, or more likely, maintained a casual interest throughout their lives. Most are not academics, and their professions range from accountants to secretaries to students. And a handful of archivists, librarians, and historians also regularly pop in to lend their expertise in the discussion boards. Historically, Zooniverse has primarily hosted scientific projects like Galaxy Zoo. Efforts have recently been made to increase the diversity of projects, with the Scribes of the Cairo Geniza being the most notable and well-known example. The Scribes project, which is pictured here on the bottom, uses volunteers to translate fragments of Hebrew and Arabic medieval texts. They boast nearly 7,000 participants and has processed over 400,000 documents. But despite the success of this and other humanities projects, the overwhelming majority of Zooniverse projects still skew scientific, and the platform is very eager to encourage more humanities scholars to use it for their research. And in contrast to well-known projects like Galaxy Zoo and Scribes that have really strong institutional buy-in and substantial support from Zooniverse, Get to Know Medieval Londoners is much smaller and more independent. It was developed using the Project Builder, a tool created by Zooniverse that allows users to design their own projects using a back-end interface. This approach has several advantages, namely increased accessibility for scholars with little to no web design experience, for those who are in the early and experimental stages of designing the project, and for those who do not have a high level of institutional support. So the unique combination of these intellectually accessible property records with a digitally accessible platform like crowdsourcing means that people can get up close with medieval material in a way that they would not be able to at a museum, by watching a documentary, or participating in any other form of public history in which the majority of the interpretive work is already done for them. Okay, so now that we've examined the sources that make up this project and talked about the platform that makes this research possible, Let's take a closer look at the life cycle of a typical project on the Zooniverse platform. Hosting a complex crowdsourcing project completely online necessitates a special kind of digital space. With Zooniverse, the framework is already there, and it is up to the project designer to fill it in and make it inviting to potential participants. So in the following section, we'll take kind of a virtual tour of the Zooniverse space and look at what it takes to make a digital environment that facilitates co-production. So everything begins with project development. This process involves defining a project scope, setting up the user interface, adjusting the workflow structure, and crafting supporting documentation. A successful project needs an open and accessible design that is compelling, straightforward, and predictable. With the Project Builder tool, which you can see here, Zooniverse has already completed much of the foundational design work and optimized it for user engagement. But this back-end interface allows project designers to input all of the specifications for their project, and then Zooniverse will build the user-facing web pages for you. So because the Project Builder takes care of web design, the primary contribution of a researcher to user experience lies in the structure of workflows and the quality of accompanying copy. Each workflow, like the one you can see here, contains a series of questions about the source that essentially convert the larger objectives of a project into bite-sized tasks. So to make this process as user-friendly as possible, workflows and help text must prioritize simplicity and clarity, rather than providing an overly detailed explanation that could overwhelm new volunteers. The project's workflows are intricately connected with the structure of MLD. From the beginning, we envisioned that Zooniverse and MLD could work together to establish a large repository of linked open data from medieval London's property records. Were it not for the existence of MLD, this project would have likely focused exclusively on the transcription of the documents. But by providing an eventual home for the data and letting its database structure, MLD made it possible for this project to collect the detailed biographical and place-based information that has a much wider range of potential uses for research. In order to facilitate the presentation of this data on MLD, the specific tasks in each workflow are directly corresponding to MLD's data fields. You can kind of see the arrows going here. So each workflow collects a different type of data with specially designed questions and customized help text. The first workflow, called Identify Places, collects geographic data on the London parishes and streets mentioned in the property deeds. It asks volunteers to read through a deed card and then type out all of the streets and parishes that they see in the text. And this information will then be translated directly into the parish and street fields in MLD. To aid users in identifying parishes and streets, a user-friendly pop-up tutorial walks them through what to expect in the workflow. And the help text is designed for each question to anticipate any challenges that they may encounter. The data collected in this workflow could be used, for example, to create a distribution map of commercial versus residential property within various parishes and on certain streets, to estimate the concentration of various guilds and occupations in those areas, or to augment existing lists of local place names and their earliest appearances in the historical record. The second workflow, called Transcribe, produces full transcriptions of each deed. It asks users to transcribe the text exactly as they see it, with the exception of abbreviations, which they are encouraged to expand if possible. For this workflow, supplemental resources contain lists of common abbreviations and a guide for deciphering certain aspects of the handwriting. The data collected here will create fully searchable transcriptions of the deed cards for the activity field in MLD. The third workflow, called Identify People, collects structured biographical data about the people who appear in the deeds. It first asks users to identify the name of a person in the record, and then answer questions about that individual's gender, occupation, citizenship, and relationship to the property in question. These questions all correspond exactly to biographical data fields in MLD. Helpful guides then explain the ins and outs of citizenship in medieval London, as well as provide lists of occupations and detailed definitions of property terms. So all taken together, the data generated through these workflows holds immense potential value for further research. On a smaller scale, one could use the data to analyze property ownership within a wealthy family or craft organization, to employ network analysis to map connections between individuals, or to study the usage of French in deeds over time. On a larger scale, the data could unveil the impact of disruptive events and economic stressors like rebellion or plague on urban land ownership, rent prices, and inheritance practices. The creation of digital, searchable, and downloadable transcriptions enables future scholars to then revisit these sources and extract their own data points, going beyond just what is encompassed in MLD. So although designing the workflows is the most time-consuming and detailed part of the development process, there are two other elements that contribute to the overall cohesiveness and user-friendliness of a project's website: pedagogical writing on the About pages and the setup of the discussion boards. So the About pages contain detailed information about the project, its scope, and the larger historical context. So while most of the other content on the site is pretty intentionally lean and concise, these sections are an opportunity to educate participants with more in-depth writing on the husting court, the original manuscripts, and the entire transcription process. Second is the discussion boards, which are called talk boards on Zooniverse, and they are arguably just as important as the workflows. Here, project designers can create boards with specific themes or purposes, where volunteers can then post questions, add comments, and engage in conversations with researchers and each other. This project has many boards that cover various topics related to the project, like London law and geography, or that provide a space for more general questions, like help and chat boards. The majority of discussions posted here contain questions related to the workflows, or just simply things that volunteers find interesting. The boards also serve as a repository of past discussions that new users can then search through to find any answers to their questions. When they are not completing the tasks in the workflows, volunteers will spend the majority of their time in here. And interactions among team members and volunteers in this space play a vital role in establishing a sense of community that promotes sustained involvement in the project. This social element is particularly crucial for projects like this one that involve very complex tasks and require a significant investment of time for upfront learning. Longer-term volunteers can then use their required expertise to assist new users and foster a more collaborative environment, rather than just relying on one-sided exchanges where a single authoritative figure hands out answers and stifles any further discussion. So by sharing insights, asking questions, and offering support to each other, volunteers create a sense of camaraderie that then enlivens this digital space. In addition to fostering dialogue, the talk boards have shed light on many potential research applications for the property deeds. For example, volunteers have questioned the impact of the Black Death on urban housing. They've looked into standardized measurements for houses, and proposed a study of property ownership by foreigners in London. Some minor discoveries have even been made, particularly regarding the earliest known references to certain churches, streets, or tavern in the historical record, as well as many vivid anecdotes of women participating in the property market or inheriting their father's businesses. After the initial development phase, the process of testing, reviewing, and revising begins. These iterative steps guarantee the effectiveness of the workflows and an optimal participant experience. So while anyone can design a project on the platform and share a private link with their network, only projects that have gone through a full review and beta testing are approved by Zooniverse and considered official. This official designation entitles a project to a formal launch announcement email to all registered Zooniverse volunteers, a place on the main project page, and a check mark next to the project's name. So the first step of the review process begins once all of the workflows and supplementary material has been set up. During the initial review, a Zooniverse staff member evaluates the projects and suggests changes. They make very helpful suggestions about workflow structure, data processing, and feasibility, all with the aim of producing the most user-friendly project possible. This is an absolutely invaluable first round of feedback from a staff member who is very familiar with both the platform and its base of volunteers. After the internal review, the project designer has an opportunity to implement any necessary changes before moving on to beta testing. During this phase, Zooniverse sends the project to a select group of volunteers. Testers then review the material, complete a few classifications, and then submit feedback on the difficulty of the tasks and how interesting they find the project. You can see a few of the results of that screen. After the beta test, the project owner then has a second opportunity to make changes, this time based on feedback from actual volunteers. Then, a Zooniverse staff member conducts a final review before giving the project their stamp of approval, allowing it to become public. The data collection phase then begins with the project's launch. The Zooniverse staff assists as much as possible with participant recruitment by offering many promotional opportunities, including an announcement email and a shout out on their official Twitter account. So overnight, the digital space really comes to life. Affectionately called the launch rush, this period lasts around 2 weeks and is very busy. During the time, the project site experiences a surge in traffic as hundreds of new volunteers stumble upon and explore the project. The digital space is suddenly very lively, with volunteers making new classifications, asking questions, and of course, having problems. Talk boards become inundated with comments and require constant upkeep to promptly resolve issues. So during the first week or so after launch, I spent around 4 or 5 hours a day correcting the issues with the workflows and talking to participants on the discussion boards. But after about a couple of months, it was only necessary to check in weekly. Following the initial launch of the rush, the primary objective is to continuously attract and retain volunteers to help with your data collection. Retaining participants requires a hybrid approach, striking a balance between regular interaction with existing volunteers and innovative recruitment strategies to bring in new ones. Retention strategies, like one-on-one engagement in discussion boards and a regular newsletter, are fairly effective at sustaining interest. Recruitment efforts, on the other hand, must be dynamic. Some promotional activities are internal to Zooniverse. So for example, in October of this year, Get to Know Medieval Londoners was selected as a featured project to be displayed at the very top of the Zooniverse project page for all volunteers to see. This greatly increased the visibility, particularly among volunteers who may not have heard of the project before. Other methods for recruiting volunteers requires looking outside of the Zooniverse community through partnerships with other organizations. In January of 2023, for example, we participated in Transcription Tuesday, the annual online volunteer event sponsored by the Who Do You Think You Are magazine. During the event, family historians come together to transcribe historical records containing genealogical and biographical information. In the lead up to this event, some of you may have seen me on the CHPPC Twitter promoting Transcription Tuesday with examples and fun facts from the project. Moving into these new digital spaces helped to bring in new audiences, as both of these collaborative and multi-organizational events worked to increase the visibility of the project among academics and family historians, which are two groups who are pretty underrepresented on the Zooniverse platform, but have so much to add to complex historical projects like this one. So during the data collection phase, promotion, troubleshooting, and engagement take up most of the project designer's time. It is difficult to tell how long this stage will last, as it depends entirely on the number of volunteers who choose to participate and the rate at which they complete tasks, which can vary greatly from project to project. So far, Get to Know Medieval Londoners workflows have been completed in accordance with their level of difficulty, with Identify Places finishing in a few months and Transcribe after about a year, while Identify People is still active and will probably take around 2 years to finish in total. So while this extended and somewhat ambiguous timeline may draw out a project's lifecycle, the amount of labor required from a project designer between launch and completion is actually pretty limited. So once all of the workflows are complete, the data processing phase begins. All of the data is stored remotely on the Zooniverse system until the project owner requests an export. The goal of data processing is to convert the classifications from their raw state, which you can see on the screen, it's pretty hectic, and transform it into a structure that mimics that of MLD's database. So while this stage of the project is still several months away for us, it is clear that the successful integration of the data with MLD structure is going to be quite complex. The anticipated solution is a combination of manual data cleaning using structured spreadsheets, alongside automated processing with Python code and embedded artificial intelligence. So with the end of data processing, the life cycle of the Zooniverse project is complete. Many researchers then move on to use their data for publications and further research, while others then start the entire process again with new source material. So having examined how Zooniverse provides the infrastructure for co-production, we'll now turn to how it enables the development of reciprocal relationships between researchers and volunteers. Part of the project's approach to crowdsourcing is the use of an inclusive digital volunteer model. Anyone is welcome to participate in the project, even if they have no prior experience working with historical material or transcribing documents. This inclusivity has many benefits, but it comes with its challenges as well. In this final section, we'll delve into the project's approach to collaborative digital history, considering the ethical implications of using volunteer labor for academic work, and examining how this project builds reciprocal relationships with volunteers through the co-production of scholarly resources. So despite the growing popularity of crowdsourcing and citizen science, some scholars have raised concerns regarding the ethical implications of conducting research in this way. In addition to any obvious issues surrounding handling of sensitive data or studying marginalized populations, the primary ethical concern is that participants are not paid for their labor. This is particularly relevant when that labor is in the service of very large institutions with equally large budgets, like NASA, for example, who have hosted dozens of crowdsourcing projects on Zooniverse over the last decade or so. Participants are, of course, never obligated to participate in a project. Indeed, many state that their interest in the subject material is their primary motivation for joining, and others just enjoy the challenge or use the work as a distraction from the stress of everyday life. However, it is still crucial to consider what a crowdsourcing project can provide for volunteers, instead of only considering what the volunteers can provide for the project. Get to Know Medieval Londoners has worked towards creating a reciprocal relationship with participants by ensuring that they are credited for their work on specific sources, providing unobstructed access to historical material, and offering opportunities to develop their skill sets and contribute directly to academic resources. The partnership with MLD provides a platform to publicly acknowledge the work of volunteers. MLD is primarily a repository of biographical data on medieval people, and each individual database entry lists the scholar or scholars who compiled that record. So when the processed data from this project is eventually uploaded to MLD, each volunteer who contributed to a specific record will receive this same cataloger credit as regular scholars. Unless participants choose to opt out of the recognition process, the cataloger field on MLD will list the Zooniverse usernames of all the volunteers who worked on the exact source material that was used to create this record. Not only does this acknowledge the hard work of volunteers whose labor made the project possible, it also allows them to see how their individual contributions can then end up as part of a larger academic project. Opportunities for growth and development are the other key part of our approach to reciprocity with volunteers. During their time with the project, participants are empowered to pursue subjects of personal interest and contribute their own knowledge and expertise to the project. Some volunteers are more than capable of assisting others with Latin translations, legal abbreviations, and more. The project encourages them to expand their skill sets by introducing them to new academic resources. Many volunteers, for example, can now highlight the connections between the deed cards they're transcribing and entries for individual properties in the Historical Gazetteer for London before the Great Fire. Publication of the deed cards were used to produce in the 1980s. That's what you can see here as a volunteer making a connection between two different properties. Others will cross-reference the parish, street, or shop that they're looking at with an entry in Henry Harbin's Dictionary of London, pointing out differences in spelling, adding more context, or noting if their deed card pushes back the earliest recorded date for that location. Those who are curious about specific individuals that they come across will now consult MLD to research that person. So this familiarity with academic sources is a skill that most volunteers do not possess before joining the project and have a chance to exercise during their participation. Supplemental materials like the field guide and reference document also illustrate this pedagogical element of the project's co-production model. Initially crafted by the project team, these documents evolved organically through the active participation of volunteers, becoming living documents that adapt and grow in response to their contributions. So the field guide serves as a comprehensive resource that addresses potential challenges volunteers may face during the workflows. Within each section, users will find explanatory text, sample documents, and links to additional resources. The section on Latin words and phrases, for example, lists common Latin terms and provides a translation, as well as helpful notes on abbreviated formats. This particular guide exists almost entirely in response to questions from participants and discussions in the chat forum. It is not a comprehensive Latin dictionary, but rather a curated selection of terms that appear most frequently in this body of source material. So whenever a user posts their Latin translation to the discussion boards, their work is then added into the field guide to be accessible for other volunteers to use. The reference document is even more collaborative than the field guide. While the field guide must be concise, the reference document serves more as a communal note-taking space. It is a shared Google Doc that anyone can access, view, and download, and it contains all of the same material as the field guide, but in a searchable format alongside additional information. So for example, it reproduces MLD's extensive list of London parishes and common occupations, both of which are too long to include in the field guide. Reproducing these lists, instead of just linking to them, allows volunteers to suggest additions directly on the document, such as adding Latin terms and alternate spellings for parishes. At the end of the project, all of these co-produced resources will be available on the MLD website as companions for the crowdsourced property data. They provide the necessary tools and resources for volunteers to independently and meaningfully analyze the subject material if they choose to do so. And these resources provide a model for co-production that is based on a reciprocal digital partnership between historians and volunteers. However, inviting volunteers with no formal training to contribute to academic resources in this way does require striking a careful balance. The project must prioritize accuracy while not stifling independent investigation and genuine inquiry. While the approach used for the field guide and reference document involves creating the scaffolding for resources and then inviting participants to fill them in, the model used in the workflows involves striving for accuracy where possible, but also utilizing built-in quality control methods. So for example, each workflow has a retirement limit, or a predetermined number of times that volunteers will classify each individual subject before it is complete or retired. This feature means that there will be multiple versions of each entry for each deed card, each completed by a different person. While this makes processing the data at the end of the project much more difficult, it safeguards against accidental mistakes, technological glitches, or any intentional disruption. It also ensures that multiple versions of the data entry exist that can be compared against each other during processing. So the final entry uploaded to MLD will either be the best one out of the original versions or a more complete and accurate version created by compiling information from several of them. But despite implementing the retirement limit as a quality control measure, the information transferred to the MLD site at the end of the project will still be 3 steps removed from its original context. Inevitably, there will be errors, misrepresentations, and inconsistencies. The project acknowledges that these imperfections are a part of a complex digitization process, and they are an expected outcome of involving non-experts in these tasks. Again, MLD provides a more elegant solution. The information presented in MLD is not intended to be an exact replica of the original documents that it catalogs, but rather to serve as a tool for the discovery of new information and new lines of inquiry. Database users are also encouraged to point out any errors or inconsistencies that they find, which an editor will then go look into and correct. So because of its unique aims and characteristics, MLD is the ideal platform to produce this specific type of co-produced data. So by embracing a truly collaborative approach to digital history, Get to Know Medieval Londoners champions inclusivity by allowing anyone, regardless of their background or experience, to be an asset for the project. The structures of this project not only take into account how the volunteers can help produce data, but also what the process of producing data can offer to volunteers. This deliberate effort to create reciprocal relationships addresses ethical concerns with volunteer labor and lays the groundwork for a genuine partnership with historians and volunteers. The sheer number of volunteers that this project has been able to acquire is a testament to the success of this approach. Now, in conclusion, Get to Know Medieval Londoners proposes a transformative model for work in public history and digital humanities that is based on inclusivity, accessibility, and reciprocal relationships. The project stands out amongst conventional research methods by directly engaging the public through advanced technology and opening up new possibilities for collaboration beyond the confines of academia or the restrictions of geography. The project thus works towards the democratization of historical knowledge by inviting a global community into a hyperlocal exploration of medieval London. The success of Get to Know Medieval Londoners sets a precedent for humanities projects to undertake large-scale data collection and crowdsourcing initiatives. It sets an example for the intersection of historical research and accessible digital platforms, demonstrating that this approach can not only lead to more accessible archives, but also to vibrant communities of scholars and enthusiasts. Similar projects could be undertaken with existing bodies of source material, such as the remaining index cards from the Social and Economic Study Project, or printed translations, such as the blended material in the Catalog of Ancient Deeds, or a cartulary recording the properties owned by London's religious institutions. Get to Know Medieval Londoners is a testament to the power of community engagement and highlights the transformative potential of collaborative initiatives in which an online space serves as a dynamic arena for the co-production of knowledge. It is digital platforms like Zooniverse, as well as the hard work of dedicated volunteers, that make these types of projects and communities possible. Thank you all so much for your attention.